So I want to start off with a question. How many of you work in Agile methodologies right now? And how many of you are here because you don't and you want to understand a little bit about what this whole Agile thing is? Okay. All right, so usually the audience is flipped for me when I've given this talk before, because I've given this talk to research audiences. So it may be going over some old ground for many of you who are working in Agile, but that's okay. At least it'll be a chance for us to have a conversation and maybe advance the conversation about working with research in Agile methodologies. So I'm Carrie Yury, and I head up research and strategy at BeyondCurious. And again, for this audience, this is going to be a no-brainer question, but why do we need to be Agile? Anybody? The world changes. That's exactly right. So 5 points for anybody who can tell me what this is a picture of. The Titanic, right, exactly. And why did the Titanic sink? Because it wasn't Agile, that's right, exactly, because it saw the iceberg, but it couldn't pivot. So digital transformation, we all know, is a business imperative. And just briefly, to tell you a little bit about my background, I work at this company called BeyondCurious, and we're a company, an agency that's focused on digital transformation of business models, capabilities, customer experiences, and cultures. And so, what that means is working with Fortune 1000 companies. Our tagline is, we make elephants run, right? Because these big companies are not built for Agile. They're not built for speed. They're very large, very slow moving, and they have a really hard time adapting to change. And as we know, that is making many of them fall like elephants with a big crash. So just to tell you a little bit about how we work at BeyondCurious, the approach is designed for momentum, so we work in Agile, entrepreneurial techniques, we work in little pods of research, UX, dev, PM, work together, and we have sprint-based pricing, and we're very mission-oriented. But today I'm just going to talk about being Agile. So we work in two-week sprints across all of our disciplines. And like I said, we work in these 2-week sprints together in pods and teams. So, what is Agile and how does it work? I could probably have some of you guys give part of this lecture. So when we talk about Agile and its benefits, we're really talking about Agile versus the other prevailing software development methodology, which is waterfall, right? So in waterfall, you have this sort of step basis where things are happening in discrete chunks and then flowing down to the next part of the development cycle, whereas in Agile, it's more like this continuous circle. And just, to go a little bit further into that, when I started doing research, I started at a design research company called eLab, which we would do these 3-month-long ethnographic research projects where we would understand, the experience of being a minivan mom, or the experience of ordering a pizza, or the experience of having a relative who had cancer, right? And we would do these big, long projects, and then at the end, we would come out with these really beautiful, gorgeous decks and experience models, which model the experience, and we'd hand them off to the design teams and say, there you go, you're welcome. That, of course, had limited effects, and we weren't the only ones working in this waterfall methodology. And around 2001, many of you will know, a bunch of software developers came together on a mountaintop in, where was it, Utah? And said, okay, we see the world is changing, and we need to change too. And so they came up with this manifesto, right? The manifesto for Agile software development. And just to put a point on it, they valued individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So that manifesto is further elucidated in a number of different principles. And these principles are important to really think about because Agile isn't just one thing. It's been interpreted in many different ways. So when you're working in Agile, you get to kind of figure out how you want to apply that. So satisfying the customer through early and continuous delivery, harnessing change for the customer's competitive advantage, and then delivering in a couple of weeks rather than 6 months. It affects how people work together, right? So working together daily, trusting each other to get the job done. So autonomy is a big thing, self-organizing teams, and face-to-face conversation. And then finally, working in Agile, a lot of people who don't work in Agile, think, but how can you do it? How can you sustain that pace? Well, that's part of the elucidation of the principles, is that you can't sustain a crazy pace for a long time, so it has to be sustainable. The team has to work together to really maintain, a reasonable, maintainable pace indefinitely. So I've already talked about self-organizing teams, but then the last thing is, it's never really done. If you're constantly looking back at what you are working on and how you're working and reflecting on how to make it better, right? Then you're constantly having the potential to evolve not just what you're building, but also the methodology itself. So, waterfall versus Agile, pros and cons. Waterfall, the pros it was great. You had your requirements up front, and then 6 months to a year later, you'd come out with your thing. There was no churn, no changing requirements. Easier to manage because the team was really focused on one thing at a time. And every phase had a great, start and end date. It was very clean. Agile, the pros are that, the organized involvement of the customers and stakeholders means for a very tight integration. That continuous feedback means that you're really always learning a lot. And, it's very flexible and reduces siloing. The cons, though, in waterfall, again, any change could seriously affect the whole enterprise, right? Like that iceberg that we saw in the Titanic. And customers really had to know exactly what they wanted up front in order to get these requirements all sort of, exactly defined. The cons of Agile are there too, for sure, right? The team has to embrace the methodology, and this is one of the biggest problems that I hear when I'm talking to different people, in enterprise or in consulting, who are trying to adapt Agile, is that, really it's a mindset change you have to embrace. That can be very difficult. And it requires a lot of commitment if you're on the consulting side too from the client, and a lot of times clients pay consultants so that they don't have to sit around and do this work and think about these problems as much because they already have their day jobs to do. Finally, estimation can be more difficult. But so, as I mentioned earlier, a manifesto is not a playbook. If you Google Agile, you'll get thousands of titles, right? It's been interpreted in so many ways. I know we have a Scrum Master in the room here. We have, there's all, it's really an umbrella term. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is how we've adopted Agile or Lean in our research and design practice at BeyondCurious. So Agile Research at BeyondCurious is an adaptive, iterative approach to user experience research. So we start, it's very much based on scientific method. We start off with a hypothesis, we test it, we learn from it, and evolve. So that can be evolving the research questions or evolving the prototype, depending on where we are in the research. We do everything from, again, very exploratory ethnographic research to UX research to usability research and beyond. So if you think about that list of pros and cons about waterfall versus Agile, again, you'll see some direct connections here. So waterfall research, it was wonderful when I got to spend 3 months, following minivan moms around and hanging cameras in their cars and watching them, unload and load the groceries and the kids fight, and you get a lot of depth and richness from that. But by the time I was done with my report, most of the design team had already moved on. So, wasn't as easy to be integrated into the process and have that immediate impact that Agile has. Siloed teams. So when I was working as a director of advanced research at Sapient, I was at Sapient for 4 years. I knew a couple of designers, a couple of brand strategists, but really my world was research. We were working in Waterfall, and that's all that I knew, because there were just so few opportunities for that kind of cross-collaboration between the disciplines. Working in Agile now, I know everybody, right? Everybody knows everybody, because they have to, and the everybody means, not just design, but also, PM and tech teams, et cetera. So it's really a much more integrated way of working that, again, one of the things that, we believe very strongly at BeyondCurious is diversity, right? We're a diverse company. We're, very strong believers in diversity of perspective. And when you take that down to the level of the team, and you have the diverse perspectives of people with all of their different expertise areas, you're going to have a lot of discord, but it's also going to be very productive discord. So to give you a sense of how we do this, here's a sample 2-week sprint. So the day 1 and 2 will develop the research protocols. Days 3 through 5 will be the field work. And then the following week, days 6 through 9, really even sometimes into day 10, we'll be doing the analysis and report building. Day 10, deliver the report, and also have a meeting to discuss the next sprint. So some of the things that make this possible for any of you who are more on the research side of UX than on the design side, you're going to say, but how do you recruit? We're always recruiting, right? So participant recruiting and scheduling is going on all the time, because this is not a one and done process. Sometimes clients will come to us and say, oh, we heard about this Agile Research thing. We'd like to buy a sprint of it. We say, okay, well, we can start talking about this, but the whole point of it, and where it really comes alive, is where you have iterative sprint over sprint testing, and you're learning, and you're getting that depth through the breadth. And I'll explain that in a minute with a case study. So another couple of things, the daily stand-ups are ongoing, and then you see all the diamonds. The diamonds are areas where we're doing deliberate share-outs to the team. So reviewing the protocols and approach, day 1/2. A report from the field, right? Which is very, very difficult. You're in the field, you're conducting all of these interviews or observations. It's difficult for a lot of researchers to want to be able to turn on a dime and share what they know, right? Because researchers, the whole point of being a researcher is being right and being really rigorous and true to the data. But it's really, really important to do that in this methodology, right? To share, here's what we think we're learning, here's what we think we're seeing, here's some interesting questions that we have, right? Because that's also an opportunity for the team to ask you the questions that they have on their mind, right? And for you to, when you're starting to do the analysis, to go deeper and to try to find those questions. Finally, the interim findings between day 7 and 8, and the final findings in the report and recommendation. So if you want to do this with your research team, how do you get started? A lot of times when I talk to researchers about doing Agile research, they say it's impossible, it can't be done, there's too much. But for me, I've always kind of thought about research in very discrete chunks that can be moved around like Lego blocks, right? Like you've got your planning, you've got your field work, your analysis, your model building. In a larger project, that could be 4 sprints right there. Or you can take them down and put them into the sort of microcosm of that initial plan that I showed you guys, right? So, but a good plan is essential. Finally, delivery every 2 weeks. Again, we work in 2-week sprints. I know some of you probably work in 1-week sprints or maybe even different variations, but in the 2-week sprint for a longer project, you can have, you can think of what you're delivering in various ways. So we worked on a global website redesign. It was an extremely complex set, a very different set of global audiences. And in that case, delivering the recruiting matrix was our sprint deliverable for the first 2-week sprint, because it was such a complex deliverable that just required so many different inputs from the client team, right? Your discussion guide, research plan, notes from the field, final report. Those can all be, again, depending on the sprint, they can be in one sprint, or they can be things that are spread out across different sprints. And the point here is that, you know, when you're thinking about moving from traditional waterfall research to this more iterative agile research, that everything you're delivering to the team is a point of collaboration and sort of cross-pollination. So we talked a little bit earlier, or I talked a little bit earlier, about the importance of culture in Agile. And an innovation mindset is absolutely crucial for not just your client team, but really particularly for your internal team. So finding a way to say yes is, again, really antithetical to the way that most researchers are trained, right? Because researchers are trained to be very methodical and rigorous and do things in a very specific way so that their results are valid, right? I mean, any cognitive psychologists in the audience, right? Exactly, right? Can I get a holla? So the trick here is to still maintain that rigor while not maintaining the rigidity, right? And it's very, very difficult to shift your mindset in that way for most people. But you know, within the UX community, you hear about, you know, fast failure, testing and learning all the time. But it's a big shift for researchers. One of the ways that we maintain that rigor is by limiting what we are actually going out to find. So unlike the old days at, you know, eLab and Sapient, where it was just, you know, understand everything about this experience, we've created minimum viable findings. So it's a riff on minimum viable product, but the idea is similar. So basically, what is the minimum viable questions, or what are the minimum viable questions that you need to address in order to push the experience forward? And that is not something that the research team develops by themselves. They develop that with the entire team, right? They may can't come in with a straw man or some hypotheses or recommendations, but it absolutely has to be validated by the entire team, right? Because if you're asking the wrong questions, you're going to be getting the wrong answers. And in a 2-week sprint, you have to be really laser focused. And of course, we'll learn more. We always learn more. But if we commit to answering the minimum viable findings questions, then at least we know that we're delivering what we're accountable for to the rest of the team. Another thing that we've developed at BeyondCurious is something called the Experience Index Score. And what it is it's basically a report card. So much of the time we're doing qualitative user experience research. But there are still metrics that we can take, right? There are still things that we can track. There's still numbers that we can associate with the user experience that we're testing. And when we track those over time, basically what we've created is it's a weighted metric. So for instance, if time spent on site, or number of pages viewed, or time spent interacting with a physical digital experience, whatever your key metrics are, you can weight those metrics and then put in the values sprint over sprint. And it's a way, not the way, definitely not the only way, but a way of kind of triangulating what you're seeing and making sure you're tracking over time. This becomes especially important when you're really doing these longer iterative projects where you're sort of tinkering with certain aspects of an experience, because then you can go back and you can say, oh, okay, well, this one here where we had, experience A.1, we've got these kinds of metrics, and then over here we're seeing the exact same thing, what was different. It's just a way for you to look at your findings and your experience, with a different lens. And then finally, we're going really, really fast, and so no, we are not creating the beautiful, holistic, in-depth experience models that we used to create at eLab most of the time, unless we take a sprint specifically to work on creating one of those. And instead, we are really relying on creating things like experience principles. So experience principles that we see that are based on the research, not based on design principles, right? But really, what does this experience need to deliver to this audience, right? By bubbling up those experience principles, they can become then guiding design principles for the entire team that can really keep anchoring the experience in the user's needs. So finally, what effect does Agile have on how people work together? Well, it means more collaboration, not less. I talked to a director over at Wells Fargo who said that when they switched from waterfall to Agile, they thought, oh, great, we're gonna go so fast now, everything's gonna be amazing. And what they didn't realize was that the amount of collaboration that it took actually slowed them down considerably. So he said it was, at first it was about 60% more time for collaboration. So, nonetheless, again, really important to keep your team close. And the team means your stakeholders or product owners or clients, as well as the internal team that you're working with, right? Involving them every step of the way, protocol development, field work, have them be in the field with you if possible, data reviews, etc. And basically what we find over and over again is that a black box is a bad box, right? So the more transparency that you can have with your teams about what you're doing, even the struggles and challenges, the more everyone will be on the same page. So one way that we work together, I have a quick slide here on tools. So cloud-based tools have made collaborating really, really so much easier. And this is just a sampling of the tools that we use to collaborate together. So, we use tools like Envision for quick prototyping, Schedule Once for participant scheduling, Trello for, there are many competitors to every single one of these. So this is just a list of the things that we use. I should have put Mural in there because that's another one we use. So what does it look like in real life? So this is a case study of, is everybody here familiar with Sonos? Yeah, somewhat? Okay. So we worked with Sonos over a period of about 3 years to help them develop their flagship store in New York. And that involved, it started off just with one little research sprint that was, we have two different interfaces and we're kind of interested in what people react better to. And so after seeing the results of that test, the client stakeholder, Whitney Walker, realized how research could not only help him make decisions very, very quickly, but also could help him get buy-in from the higher-ups that he needed to be getting buy-in from in order to push through the store. So that one sprint led to about 3 years worth of almost continuous sprints. So we did research across exploration, creation, and validation, all three sort of areas of the store. Initially, we did some broad understanding of users and their context. So we did some D-Scout studies and ethnographies to understand how people were using Sonos in their homes and what Sonos meant to them. At the time, Sonos's commercials were very focused on, they would show like a picture of, what's that guy, Deadmau5, sitting alone in a room in a beautiful, kind of sterile environment. And then when we would follow Sonos users in their homes, we would get these D-Scout videos. Is everybody familiar with D-Scout? It's like a self-tracking mobile journaling diary. We would get these, endless videos of spontaneous family dance parties, right? So we were saying, okay, the experience of owning Sonos is really radically different from how you're portraying the value of this to your clients. And then I'll show you some sort of range of techniques we used. We did all of this. The point of this is to show you it's all in these 2-week sprints, right? So we did self-tracking studies, in-home ethnography, shop-alongs, intercepts on Sonos.com, and then many, many rounds of digital prototype store testing, experience testing, service model tests, and then finally a giant UAT with about 100 people all at the same time in this prototype store. So Sonos built a full-scale prototype store in a warehouse in Carson, California, and that's where we did all of these tests. We would have people come to this secret warehouse where many participants told us that they thought they were going to get mugged. It was not the best area. But initially they built out this kind of spaceship-looking prototype that was, many people would come in and say, it looks like a museum. Yeah, it's really cool. But they were totally alienated. They had no idea what the value of the product would be or how it would be interesting and important in their lives. And at the time, their brand penetration in the United States was about 5%, so nobody knew who they were. We couldn't rely on their brand perceptions or familiarity. So we did all of these tests, and the first pivot that we made, so this is the outside of the store that opened in last summer, was the store architecture. So the first store architecture was basically a big, long room with displays on one wall and like a table, a communal table where theoretically sales could go on. Over and over and over again, we saw people kind of, being kind of mildly interested. But then when they got to this one little room in the back, which is the listening room, they just freaked out and, completely had this amazing religious experience with the sound quality of the Sonos, right? And so we kept on saying sprint over sprint, and they'd already spent a lot of money getting this prototype together, fancy architect, all this stuff. I said, guys, you can't, the little room, that's what it's all about. And to their credit, they listened. And they scrapped their original architecture, hired a new architect and a new interior firm, and put together these listening pods, which have, because Sonos is a multi-room system, you can control from one device many different rooms in multiple ways. And that was, again, nobody else could do it at the time. Each room represents 3 different rooms. You can't see it in this picture, but on this side, it's the kitchen, and that wall represents the living room, and this room represents the study. And then you can see the little tablet kiosk there where people could sit down and have the authentic experience. So speaking about those tablets, what we wanted to do was design this store so that anybody could walk in and have, an epic, called it the epic first experience, without any guidance, without anybody having to explain to you what was going on. And so we did endless testing on this user interface to make sure that it was something that people would sit down at, immediately be invited to start the video, have kind of orientation information that would help them know what they were looking at and what they could do, and then plop them immediately into the actual Sonos app where they could control and play anything in the world. And it took many iterations because a lot of those things were contrary to what some people in the company thought, to what other design firms that we were working with thought. They wanted to have a very, the Sonos app at the time just had a refresh. It's a lot better now, but at the time, it was not a very usable interface. So a lot of people said, well, let's just give them something neat and clean where they can push one button and it'll be beautiful. And we said, no, you can't do that, because what we've seen is when people actually are able to interact with the authentic experience and control the music the way that is authentic, that's when they have that religious experience, right? something about, just really doing it themselves gets that buy-in. So, again, after many, many tests, we were able to convince them to put the authentic experience, and keep it authentic was actually one of our experience principles. And so, the results were great. They measure themselves as a company by Net Promoter Score, and the Net Promoter Score of the store itself is 89, which is like really great. And yeah. So I don't have that much time, but I'm going to talk a couple slides about how Agile research will evolve. So for me, it's been really interesting because it has meant that I'm interested in hiring not people who are just skilled in one area of research, but who are more, as they say, unicorns. We all hate that term, but we know what it means, so I'm using it. But the question for me is, how can we gain that really, really important cross-pollination, cross-methodology, exposure, and experience while maintaining the depth of our expertise in each of our disciplines, right? Data. Again, I started out as an ethnographer, so I am, hugely biased towards actual behavior. But, working in this way, we developed the experience index score. It's meant that all kinds of data have become more important and available to us. So, I'm just really interested to see how data and data science will kind of continue to evolve this approach. And then perceptions of research. So I feel like I hear people who don't have anything to do with research talking about research more and more. It's become more foregrounded, more important, and also there's a lot of struggle with how do we get the research that we need, how do we scale it in an organization. I'm looking over at Tomer. He's going to talk about that tomorrow. So, how to do that responsibly and effectively so that we, again, have the rigor and the depth of results that mean that we can really trust what the research is telling us. So, I think I'll stop there. Yeah, 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes. We can have some questions. Yeah? Okay. Okay. Any questions?